No.
I was just offended by the word hangover.
Offended?
Okay, here we go.
Sportsman at 7 for breakfast tomorrow.
Me?
So, first of all, to the kids that are not in my class, but you're in here, fine. Until it isn't fine, then you got to go. But until then, you're welcome to stay. To CIS kids, I told the junior class to come and ask you about CIS. Some might want to take it as a senior. Give me your honest opinion. You love it, you hate it, whatever. Okay. Tomorrow, bus leaves at 8:15. You do check into your advisory for attendance, and then I'll meet you in the lobby. It's supposed to be nice out tomorrow, low 60s, but maybe bring a jacket. We'll be outside for a little while, just kind of sitting there, enjoy a coffee, and then walk into the lecture hall.
Coffee.
And then after the lecture goes from like 9:45 till 11, and then the prof is going to stay with us and just answer any questions you have. So your job is to actually listen tomorrow, and then when he says something that you think, gee, I wonder if, write that question down, because you're going to get a chance to ask him later. And the worst thing that can happen tomorrow is we go into this room, which has been reserved for this class plus the professor, and we all sit down and he says any questions, and no one says anything.
Wait, is there going to be other CIS classes or just us?
Just us. I think there might be one other.
Are we walking around after the lecture?
Do we do notebooks? Yeah, should we bring our notebooks then?
What do you mean walk around?
We already toured it.
You've already toured it.
We should do it again. You said we get to go across the bridge this time.
Yeah, we are on the other side of the bridge.
Okay,
Oh, okay.
should we bring our notebooks then?
Well, we should walk across.
Not like I'm going to test you on this stuff. She just asked, should we bring our notebooks? Not necessarily for note taking, just maybe you'll hear something and think, gee, I'd like to know, and then maybe jot down a question. Or it is possible that you'll hear something that might help you with your fourth quarter paper. Maybe something else. Okay, any questions on Tamara? By the way, there's still like 4 of you who have not turned in your permission slip and money. I guess you're not going? Have fun tomorrow?
Potter, I got a question.
It's called The End of History. It's by there's this guy named Francis Fukuyama, and at the end of the Cold War, he wrote an essay called The End of History, basically arguing that that's it, we won. We've won every conflict. We're the victors. The U.S. is and it was before 9/11, so sort of misread that one. Anyway, any other questions? I've heard him before. I think he's good, but I kind of like history, so kind of jaded.
Sounds good.
I've got some things to cover, and then I do want to give you a bit of time for you to think about your fourth quarter paper and use the time that's available to you. We are going to continue based on this premise that the United States reached a different conclusion after World War II than World War I. Conclusion after World War I is, good God, the world is crazy. Let's just isolate ourselves.
They need us.
The conclusion after World War II is the world needs the U.S. We need to become engaged. We need to create international organizations that we are part of, but that other countries are also part of so that we can control them. Countries that trade with each other do not war against each other. Countries that are both part of a United Nations do not engage in rogue behaviors, etc. Okay. So basically what I just said is what is just appeared on this screen, and that is after World War I, the U.S. conclusion was we need to isolate ourselves. Thank God for the oceans. Go kill yourselves, Europe. It's not our problem.
That's not very nice.
Problem with doing that is you allow for radical conclusions to be reached by the Germans and the Japanese because of the Great Depression. And we had no impact. We had no way of telling the Germans, I think what you're doing is crazo. Right? We were not part of any international organization. So after World War II, we reached a different conclusion. The first conclusion is we need to become the leader, the king of the hill. The U.S. must be number one. And what's the next big threat? And the next big threat is communism. During World War II, the big threat was fascism, German Empire, Japanese Empire. Check. We've crossed that off the list. Well, now what? Now what's the big threat on the horizon? And the big threat on the horizon was communism. National ownership of businesses, which, of course, directly threatens the U.S. because no country on earth has more foreign-owned businesses than the U.S. Maybe I just confused you. Even today, the U.S. is the world's number one in terms of the owners are here, but the factories are over there, wherever over there is. Sorry? Where? Yeah. Nike, exactly. Nike has a shoe factory in Vietnam. So if Vietnam becomes communist, the U.S. becomes concerned because, hey, we have a factory there that's owned by an American. Right? You might wonder, like, who cares if Vietnam becomes communist? It's a backward country on the other side of the earth. What difference does it make? But it does make a difference because American-owned companies are there. And if that country becomes communist, now the nation owns it, and now the Americans no longer own it. Okay? Remember back when we looked at the time period up to World War I introduced Wilson and Roosevelt and Taft. And does anyone remember what Taft called his foreign policy?
Boom.
It's the letter D twice. So no one remembers. I heard D-Day, which is a good guess, but wrong. Dollar diplomacy, right? Dollar diplomacy. Allow American businesses to invest in foreign countries rather than the United States government giving Panama money and saying, here's American taxpayers, build a canal. No, let's let an American business open a factory in Panama and hire Panamanians, right? So that's the operating belief during the Cold War, is that communism is a threat. The belief that the Soviets were aggressive. They're the aggressor. Now, if you took off that pair of glasses and put on the Soviet pair of glasses, we're the aggressor. But the American pair of glasses is, hey, the Soviets are invading their neighbors, creating buffer states. They want to spread communism. They're the aggressor, and we need to stop that. And we need international organizations. We need to have Germany be part of a United Nations or a World Bank so that we can control Germany or Japan or any other rogue state. So let me give you a couple examples of organizations that were started after World War II, largely with U.S. involvement, and by the way, are still around today. So this is the International Monetary Fund. Hey, middle of country in the middle of Africa, would you like a bridge? That costs money. Where are you going to get that money? From the International Monetary Fund, of course. You can borrow that money and you got to pay it back, but there are strings attached. Same thing with this thing called the World Bank. These two are basically the same thing. It's just two different organizations. You want to build a new road or a bridge or a school or a hospital, you can borrow money from these two banks, which are financed by the wealthy countries, the U.S. But there are strings attached. I'm wondering if any of you could guess what the strings are.
Interest.
I'm a middle of Africa, poor country. I want a new bridge. I borrow money from the World Bank, and the World Bank says, here you go. Let's just keep it simple and say it's $1,000. Good luck building a bridge for $1,000, but let's just keep it simple. When you pay it back, you're going to pay back $1,000 plus interest, but there are strings attached to this money.
They have to own the bridge. Someone has to own the bridge.
No.
No.
Good guess, though. You have to join what?
They're World Bank.
Okay, you're on the right track. Yes? You're on the right track. You're getting there. Very good. Okay, generally you get the idea. You have to behave a certain way. Hey, can we kill all people of a certain religion within our country? No, you don't get the money if you do that. Hey, can we prevent women from voting in our country? Suddenly the World Bank wants their money back. That's the kind of strings. Behavior strings. You need to be a normal country, right? Respect the rights of women or minorities, which is ironic because a lot of countries looked at us and said, but you don't. Never mind us. You do it. Do as we say, not as we do, was a comment. This is the flag of the United Nations, another organization, also something called the World Health Organization. All four of these still exist today. You can borrow money from these two banks today, but there are strings attached. Now, I'm about to synthesize. There is another economic giant out there today. Increasingly, countries are turning to this alternative loaning organization because that alternative loaning organization has no strings attached. This thing doesn't care about how you behave within your country. So there's the U.S. approach, which is, hey, you should borrow money from these organizations. Yeah, there are strings attached, but it's the right thing to do. And then there's this organization over here, and I'm wondering if any of you can figure out who it is, and they say, you want to borrow money? All we care is you pay us back. We don't care about what you do. Does anyone have a guess here? Go ahead. What do you say? Bitcoin? No. It's China, right? China has emerged as an economic threat to the U.S., and it is attractive to certain countries like, say, North Korea, right? The U.S. would never lend money to North Korea because we believe that they would just use that money for illegitimate purposes, but they'll borrow money from the Chinese, and the Chinese don't care about your behavior, what you're doing within your countries. Okay. Questions? This is the modus operandi of the U.S. after World War II. We need to be number one. We need to create a global order. And how do we get countries to jump in line? Money. Money gets you to behave a certain way. So we'll lend you money as long as you behave a certain way. This thing about China, that's now. So I hope you didn't write that down as in, but China emerged at this time as a competing. No, that's now. Chinese behavior is 2019. Okay. Sorry?
China wasn't in a great place at this time.
No, absolutely not. Right? No, China was poor. All right, let's keep going. So I'm trying to make you understand specific historical events, and now you can kind of understand it. Why? So the word is containment. Synthesis. Some of you in your essays, I hope, will be writing. That'd be great if some of you finished those things. Anyway, about how one of the alternatives that the U.S. military had with Japan was containment, right? You don't have to invade. So many people thought, well, we either drop the bomb or we invade. Why were those the only two options?
Naval blockade.
Why not you just surround them? And I suggested to you, like, try and find historical examples when the U.S. did that in a military situation. Here it is. Okay. The U.S. never invaded the Soviet Union. We never invaded the Soviet Union. Instead, what we did was we surrounded the Soviet Union and said, we're good. You will not increase the amount of land under your control. Neither will we. But we're going to just simply contain you where you are and prevent you from spreading. Because remember, during the Cold War, the U.S. concluded that the Soviets were the aggressors. So if we thwart their aggression, we win, was the conclusion. Okay? So in blue represents American allies, right? Look how we're preventing them from spreading like a disease, right? We're the Band-Aid that prevents them from spreading. Hooray us! We're the heroes. Visually, this map is captured by this political cartoon. You've got the aggressive Soviet Union represented by the bear. You know how the American symbol is the eagle? The Soviet symbol is the bear. Okay. And look, they're trying to be aggressive. They're trying to spread communism into Western Europe and the Middle East and Africa, and they're going to invade Afghanistan, and they're going to spread to Thailand and Vietnam. They're the aggressor. We've got to stop it from happening. Now let me show you from their point of view the world as it was. We're the aggressor. We were the ones spreading around and threatening them. I mean, I'm telling you, look how we contained them. We're the hero. They're the ones trying to spread their disease called communismism. And from their point of view, no, you're the ones surrounding us. You're the aggressor. And we were invaded in World War I, and we were invaded in World War II, and now you're next. So from their point of view, in their shoes, we're the aggressor. In our point of view, they're the aggressor. Okay? So much of American history is conflict is caused by an alternative point of view about the same event. Right? Think of the Mexican-American War. Who is the aggressor in the Mexican-American War? Of course, you Americans say they were. They crossed the Rio Grande. Right? In their point of view, we were the aggressor because we crossed the Nueces River. Okay. Please be comfortable with the first two bullets. The first two bullets represent how the U.S. made these countries blue. Blue means American ally. How did we do that? How did the U.S. convince these countries to not go Team Red? Team Red means communist. Let's skip to the second one first. We're going to address this thing called the Marshall Plan. Do you know what the most effective way to fight communism is?
Don't.
Money. Money. Right? Communism is attractive to poor people. Right? Again, think about this. I used this analogy before, but what if I gave all of you the average grade of the last test that we just took? Right? I take the entire class, average it, and give you all that same grade. Now, some of you would be thinking, sweet, you're the poor people. And some of you would be thinking, that's not fair at all. You're the wealthy people.
I'm rich.
You're rich. The solution then is to make you all rich. Let's make you all rich. That's what the Marshall Plan was. The United States, after World War II, did not lend, they gave. Here, Western Europe, so England, France, et cetera, money. And not a little bit of money, a lot of money. I don't know the amount.
What's the Marshall Plan?
I'm telling you what the Marshall Plan is.
He's saying
The United States gave Western Europe money. Hey, now, what do countries need to spend tax money on to make sure? What does a country spend tax money on? Healthcare, roads, military. Okay. So think about this. What if the United States gave you money and said, "All right, here's money. We understand that World War II devastated you, but don't worry about defending yourselves. We'll defend you. We got it. So take that percent of your budget that was normally spent on Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all that stuff, and spend it somewhere else because the U.S. will defend us." So not only were they given money, part of their budget was also taken off the table. The U.S. would have American soldiers in Western Europe defending West Germany, France, Britain. And we told those countries, don't worry about your defense. We got it. We did the same thing with Japan. We gave Japan money and then said, we'll defend you. Don't worry about defending yourself. Those countries quickly recovered economically. They rebuilt their industry. Think about the largest car company on earth today. It's Toyota.
Ford.
Number one. No, Ford is not. Toyota is number one. Although, ironically, the largest Toyota plant in the world is in Tennessee. Figure that one out. Anyway, Japanese car company. Honda, Japanese car company. How did they do that? Well, their government subsidized, helped pay for the development of the auto industry in Japan. Okay. Everyone understand what the Marshall Plan was?
Yes.
Truman Doctrine. It's named after a guy by the name of Truman. Very good.
Doctrine, Harry Doctrine.
Very good. If you believe that this is the reality, that the Soviet Union was the aggressor, that the Soviet Union was going to actively try to establish communist governments in Africa, in the Middle East, or whatever, the U.S. has to confront that. So if the Soviet Union is trying to overthrow the Libyan government, the Americans will support the rebels that are preventing that overthrow. If the Soviets are supporting a rebel group, the U.S. will support the government. If the Soviets are supporting the government, the U.S. will support the rebel group. Here's you, here's me. There's you, there's me. We're going to be buddies. We're going to be pals. We're going to wrestle. The Truman Doctrine was a military doctrine. The Marshall Plan was an economic doctrine. Truman Doctrine goes like this. The U.S. will actively militarily confront Soviet efforts to overthrow governments. The U.S. will actively militarily confront Soviet governments that are trying to be overthrown by rebel groups trying to establish capitalism. And where it happened mostly is the Middle East. Mostly in the Middle East. Anyone need me to repeat that?
Yeah. The U.S. will actively.
Okay. What? So the Marshall Plan was a military plan. The U.S. would actively, militarily confront.
You mean the Truman Doctrine?
Yeah, Truman Doctrine. What did I say? Truman Doctrine. The U.S. would actively, militarily confront Soviet efforts to overthrow governments and establish communism. We would actively, militarily confront it with weaponry, not necessarily American soldiers, but we'll arm you, country.
Soviet efforts
to overthrow government.
We will arm you.
So pretty much to stop.
Yeah.
The other one was like.
Notice, by the way, that I'm intentionally saying we tried to spread capitalism. I have yet to mention the word democracy.
You just did.
Okay, I said the word democracy as a way of pointing out that the Cold War was not necessarily about democracy.
That's 6 times you said it now.
Yes.
You know if like Russia made a Red Dawn-esque movie about us invading?
I have no idea. But I do think that was part of Soviet propaganda and Chinese propaganda. The narrative. We'll call it the narrative. The narrative has elements of truth. I mean, this has elements of truth. This has elements of truth. It's the narrative. It's the weaving of facts into a story that you find compelling. Happens all the time. Last note here, and that is the state of Israel was created by the United Nations. Israel is, well, it's not even on the map. Israel's right about here. Okay? Think about the Holocaust. An awful event in Europe, wiping out about 1/3 of Europe's Jews. The reason the Jews were targeted, partly, is because of the opportunity of targeting them. They were targeted because they could be targeted. The wolf chases the slow deer. It doesn't pick the fastest, strongest deer and say, get him. You chase the slowest deer. The bully picks on the weakling. The Germans picked on the Jews. And so the conclusion was, after World War II, isn't it sad that Jews are a minority everywhere they live? What if they were the majority population in their own country? Jewland.
Israel.
And so they did. They carved out a chunk of land in the Middle East, a location of the ancient Jewish kingdom, and said, here's the land of your ancestors. Now, the problem was that there were people that lived there already. Palestinians, exactly. Arabs. And so their argument was, why are you taking our land and giving it to the Jews? Why don't you give them Germany? They're the ones who did it. Give them Germany. Or how about New Jersey? Nobody likes New Jersey. Give them New Jersey. But they didn't. I've used this before, but I'll use it again. Let's just, imagine somebody rings your doorbell tomorrow morning and says, I'm really hungry. You got any food? And you say, sure. And you put your arm around the guy and you go to your neighbor's house and you open his fridge and you give him all your food. Not your food, your neighbor's food. and you're walking out of the house and your neighbor hears the noise of you raiding his fridge, comes out and says, why didn't you give him your food? Why did you come to my fridge? And you walk away. That's what happened. Israel was created out of land that did not belong to the groups that gave it to the Jews. And so these people become angry. By the way, here's chapter 1 of Why Did 9/11 Occur? Here's where it begins, 1948. Okay, keep that in your mind. Whew. Questions?
I have a question.
Thank you for introducing that.
I thought that chapter 1 was when Columbus sailed.
Son of a... All right, this is chapter 2. Similar events in Japan. What I'm about to say is true in Germany with the Nuremberg trials. You are looking at a photograph of high-ranking Japanese military who were held accountable for behavior during World War II. In the history of the world, this had never happened before. The concept goes like this. Before World War II, if you controlled the area inside the circle that I'm drawing, then whatever you did within that circle is legal because you're the entity that did it. How can you say that wiping out a certain group of people within the circle is illegal? I rule the circle. So what I do within the circle is legal because I am the government entity. I can wipe out Jews because I control this chunk of land and I wipe out the Jews, but that's my call. I am in control of the circle. The same thing with Japan. Japan could say, before this, whatever area was under our control, nothing's illegal because we did it. And we're in control of the circle. Aha. But after World War II, in Germany and in this case, Japan, we have a group of people being held accountable by Earth. There are rules about Earth. You cannot simply target a group of people. And the Japanese could say, but it's legal. We made it legal. And the Germans could say, but it was part of the final solution. We legalized it. Did you know that? The German government passed a law, the final solution, which legalized what they were doing. But no, you can't just legalize it. And then the rest of the world's like, well, it's legal. Sorry, you can't do that. There are rules that govern Earth. These were Japanese that were held accountable. Some were executed. Same thing in Germany. High-ranking German officials, some were executed, some had life in prison, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. High-ranking officials were held accountable for their behavior, even if it was during a war. War does not excuse unlawful behavior. I've heard some of you in this room say this. That was okay because we declared war on them. Therefore, it justified what we did because we declared war. No. The conclusion of this trial and Nuremberg was it doesn't matter. You can't just declare war and then get to do whatever you want. You can't declare war and then use mustard gas. There are rules, even during a war. Your hand was in the air.
Who are you talking to me?
Was it your hand? You.
Who creates the rules of Earth then?
Earthlings.
So then why can Japan just say like?
It's a good question. She asked, well, who writes those rules? These international organizations, right? The UN, the treaties, right? That the nations of the earth will create the rules, and everyone's bound to them. And if you're like Germany or Japan, you could say, but we never signed that agreement. Too bad. You don't get to tell the cop when you're pulled over for speeding, I never voted for that law. That's nice. Here's your ticket.
Can I do that one?
Give it a try. Give it a try.
Probably be.
You are now looking at the ruler of Japan from 1945 to 1955.
What?
That is Douglas MacArthur.
He was the general.
He was the ruler of
Why is that
Japan.
funny.
You won't see him in Japanese history books about rulers, but he was. He was the ruler of Japan during the American occupation of Japan for 10 years. Okay, so 2 bullets. Both of these things I've talked about already. Number 1, there were war crimes trials, both in Germany and Japan. the concept was war does not justify unlawful behavior. Now, you could argue, well, what about when the Americans dropped the atomic bombs? Didn't that violate international law? And the reason I can retort is there was no law about the use of nukes at the time. It was a new weapon. So what law?
There was none.
There was none. Now, have there been some since? Yes. And then in Japan, we did the same thing. We said, hey, Japan, don't worry about spending money on your military. We'll defend you. So what they did was they took that money that would have otherwise been spent on the Japanese military and they poured it into industry. They created Toyota and Honda and Nintendo and some of these other fabulous Japanese companies. Sony, very good. I hope, let me go back for a second. I hope that what you're seeing here is a lot of good stuff for American involvement in the world. Those of you who are writing that paper, here it is, right? I hope you are seeing a justification for American involvement in the world, the idea that all nations need to be held accountable for behavior. The United States supported that. That makes, you could argue that makes the world a better place. American involvement. Okay, so you are seeing stuff, I hope, that you could use in paper option number 1. Okay, last slide here. And this one shouldn't take long. Meanwhile, in China, China is the most populous country on earth, even today. About 1.5 billion people. Although they, interestingly enough, they believe India will pass it soon.
India's
Chinese government policies limiting the number of kids you could have in the 1970s is having a ripple effect. You had all these Chinese families with one kid, and as any of you who are the single kid in your family know, you are spoiled rotten. And so you have these single kid families in China with spoiled rotten brats, and they don't like that. So the Chinese government has changed its policy because they don't want a nation full of spoiled rotten single kid families. So anyway, but India, procreate, man, go for it. Meanwhile, in China, before World War II, was engaged in a civil war. So the Chinese were fighting themselves. Then Japan invaded. So these two stopped fighting themselves and fought the Japanese. Then they beat the Japanese, and they started fighting each other again. Okay? The civil war in China was between a guy by the name of Mao Zedong and a guy by the name of Chiang Kai-shek. Mao Zedong wins. Mao Zedong is a communist. He did. He fled to Taiwan. Story for another day, but he fled to Taiwan. I've told you some of this story, but here goes. When I was in college, I had a cat named Dog.
wait.
I had a cat named Dog. I had a cat.
Yeah,
We called him Dog. And I'm driving home from Marquette one day. We have to go to Madison to pick up my brother's girlfriend and her brother. So it's me, my brother, his girlfriend, and her brother, and Dog, my cat. And we're in the car. We're driving, and it's a winter storm. No one was going above 30. Same trip. We saw a BMW go by us about 80 on Highway 90. And I turned to my brother and said, we're about to watch people die. And turned back. And at that moment, the car started swinging, doing end over end, and ends up in the ditch. So Nostradamus here, right? So we pull up slowly to help these people because we think they're in serious injury, right? And my brother, who's in the passenger seat, and he turns to me and says, keep going. Now, that's not a message you'd hear normally. Like, why? I'm just dying of curiosity. Why? So I look around him, and in the moments after the car went into the ditch, and by the time we got there, which might have been 15 seconds, all 4 people were out of the BMW in a straight line. They were all dressed really well. One guy was in the car grabbing something, throwing it to the second guy who caught it, who threw it to the third guy who caught it, who threw it in the ditch, right? And they looked like bricks about this big, and they were white. They're like, yep, they're fine. Let's keep going. Same trip. My cat, dog, doesn't meow. Meow, meow, meow. Mouse. Meow, 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 meow. Meow, meow. Runs under the driver's seat. Meow, meow. Meow. And like, well, that's not a normal. Any of you cat owners? So you know. He started dumping right under the car seat. And cat crap, there's a reason there's kitty litter. It stinks. So I pulled over. We all got out. Right? And we're all standing behind the car, which is full of cat crap now. And there's dog like, when are we going? And we're like, well, someone's got to clean this thing. So we played rock, paper, scissors. And I did scissors.
How old were you?
21.
Okay.
Handsome. I did scissors. The other three did paper. So I'm like, sweet, I'm out. And they're like, no, you're the odd man out. You lose. I'm like, scissors, paper. Anyway, I cleaned it with my bare hand, and I had my hand out the window the rest of the drive home. Anyway, the point of this story is that my cat meows.
You told this story in real context.
Can we talk more about the BMW? Did you hear anything about it on the news?
Isn't the point of your story that the neighbor does the BMW?
He probably does, yeah. Okay, last thing I'll mention here, and then we're done. This is a chart representing the number of nuclear missiles built by both the U.S.
What did he do?
and the Soviet Union during the
I don't
Cold
know
War.
who this dude is.
In 1945, we built 2.
What did he do?
3, I guess.
He
Wait,
won.
no, he won.
What did he win?
He's a communist. He won the.
He won the Chinese Civil War. The blue represents
what?
the number of
Chinese
missiles
Civil
that
War.
the U.S. built. The red represents the number of missiles the Soviets built. The highest number ever is 1985, when the U.S. had almost 25,000 nuclear missiles, and the Soviets had something like 45,000. And math tells me that adds up to
A lot.
70,000. 70,000. Experts believe that it would take about 7,000 nuclear warheads to destroy man. And there were 70,000, which means that the US and the Soviets had the capability of killing everyone and then killing them again and 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 then really killing you. Which of course defies logic, doesn't it? Why do you need to kill someone 10 times? Once is good.
Well, if they're a cat, then they have 9 lives.
Good point. The point here is this. This is an arms race. The reason I built 2 missiles is because you built 1. And now you need to build 2 more. And then I need to build 2 more. It's not rational. The Cold War was not rational. It's the same thing that happened during World War I. For every German sub built, the British would build another surface ship. So the Germans would build another submarine. So the British would build another, and beyond reason. The North Atlantic was just littered with submarines. They'd run into each other once in a while. Okay? Same thing. This is not logical. Okay? There. I'm done.
That was a building of
Nuclear missiles.
Notre Dame.
So this class does go until 10-2, so you do have 15 minutes. I don't see computers, but frankly, you don't necessarily need computers, right? If you're just outlining your paper, it's just kind of you thinking a bit.
Yeah.
Maybe using your book.
That's where the problem is at.
Thinking. You and thinking.
Yeah.
Just go sit down. I'll come to you.
Oh, I'm done.
I'll come to you. I gotta pull up this.
Can I charge this in there again?
Yeah.